I think that most things are figure outable, and most people can do more than they think that they can do. So I do push people. I do push people kind of out of their comfort zone. And I think that for some people that works really well, and they've really thanked me for it. For others, you never know when it's too much. But I try to create the environment, and I try to push people, and I give them a lot of leeway. And I think as long as I trust that you're smart and you're well-intentioned and you understand the objectives and you have a kind of a structured approach to how you're doing things, and it's mostly working, I'm really happy to empower people. I don't want to micromanage at all. And I try not to fuss about the small things. There's some analogy somebody gave me one time, like one of these puzzles, like if you had to put like a bunch of rocks into a jar, and they were of varying sizes, how would you approach it? And you have to put the big rocks in first.
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of a Leader show with me, Maria Vorostovsky. I'm the founder and CEO of HVO Search. Founders, CEOs, and lone HR directors hire me when they feel stuck and under pressure to hire the right senior leaders who will grow their companies. They work with me to ensure they don't hire the wrong person. I'm on a mission to discover what makes a great leader, the skills they have, what drives them, to really dissect what success looks like and what it takes to get to the very top. My aim is to bring to you leadership stories of entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, investors, authors, leaders from all walks of life, the failures they faced, what they wish they knew before they started, and the hurdles they had to overcome. If you want to be inspired, surprised, and feel like you're not alone in your struggles towards the very top, you're in the right place here on Anatomy of a Leader. Like and comment below and subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single episode. It will change the way you think and may even change your life. Vanessa, thank you so much for coming on to the show. What a pleasure to meet you in person. And we haven't spoken. We have been connected on LinkedIn for a while, but real pleasure to have you here in the studio.
For having me.
Well, Vanessa, you are the co-founder of the Restory, which I think is such a fascinating business and so needed in the world. What inspired you to start that, and how did that come about?
So the seed of the idea started when I moved to London from New York. I was a financial analyst in New York at an investment bank, desperate to get out of banking. And my big ambition at the time was to be a management consultant. So I landed my interview at Accenture, and I was getting ready to go to my interview, and I had my power suit and this pair of boots that were like, nothing special, but they went with this suit, and they were, to me, they were great, and they made me feel like a boss. And like, that was how I would go to interviews. So I took them to the local cobbler to get them just cleaned up before my interview. And the guy, long story short, the guy unapologetically destroyed them. And then when I was complaining about it, he kind of licked his teeth and was saying that, he didn't do what I was clear was obvious that he had done. And then I kind of threw in a last comment, and they're not even cleaned, because in New York you would never get a pair of shoes back that weren't also polished if you had sent them in for a repair. And he told me it wasn't profitable for him. So coming from New York, my jaw just like absolutely hit the floor. And so that was kind of the spark, I suppose. So I got another pair of shoes, and I went and I nailed my interview, and I spent the next 8 years at Accenture. But it was, it was kind of that seed of an idea, and then it kind of kicked off. Then every subsequent experience to that became like kind of a building block on that idea. So I would take my husband's custom suits to the dry cleaner, and I didn't think that I needed to explain to somebody that this is a nice fabric and don't put it in that hot presser, and they just would, and it'd come back all shiny, and like, we'd get in a big fight about it. Or like, I would have to, as I was explaining before, I would have to, the stuff you didn't care so much about would go kind of around the corner, and the stuff you did care about, you had to kind of find a specialist, and then you had to test them with a few things and give them something a little harder each time, just to make sure you could even trust them. And they were usually really far away with the really inconvenient hours and the green paper tickets and blah, blah, blah. And, and like, meanwhile, the whole world's moving on the phone. And and I just felt like this is such a faff. Like, why is this like this? And then from a business perspective, I'd be like, why does all this effort go into getting me to go into Harvey Nichols and have this amazing, and feel good about spending 700 pounds on shoes? And like, I know the minute I walk out the door, something's going to happen to them, but that relationship is over the minute you walk out the door. In contrast, if you buy a nice watch or you buy a car or some other luxury products, they know it's a high consideration, low frequency purchase, and they'll fall over themselves trying to keep you engaged so that the next time you're in the market for that sort of a product, that, they're top of mind. And so I just felt like from a consumer perspective, I was frustrated. I felt it was really inconvenient, really inconsistent, rather untrustworthy. And when I looked at it as a business person, I thought like, well, this just doesn't feel like it makes sense.
No. It definitely doesn't. And I wonder if part of it is to do with fashion industry's idea that, well, you only wear them for this season and next season there's going to be something else. So why even worry about, repairing it or, or doing something with it? Yeah. I mean, I had a similar experience of taking a pair of shoes which were also destroyed. And I'm like, surely there must be better ways. So now there are.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's definitely part of it. The frequency of styles and turning out collections and things like that definitely play a role in it. But also the way that we've moved the supply chains kind of, there's a cost to cheap. And I think we've all known, at least in the back of our minds, that there's been a human cost to that. And then over the last kind of decade, we've started to learn more and more. There's also an environmental cost to this. And now I think through COVID, just the general impact of it is just become front and center in a way that we can't ignore and we can't sweep under the rug anymore. And we're all kind of having a reckoning with that. And,
Definitely. And also looking at the four walls and probably wardrobes and thinking, what are all these things doing here?
Yeah, and what's important to me.
And what's important? Do I want to keep it?
And like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think we're all faced with all of these sort of existential questions, which also translates into the kind of material things that we want to possess or how we want to treat those ourselves and the external world. It's fascinating.
I mean, it started as, a personal itch and a convenience that I wanted, something I wanted to see in the world that I could use. And then sustainability became bigger and bigger and bigger. And that, of course, put wind in the sails. And now I think that, telling this story almost feels a little bit quaint because that feels like a very small part of it. Now it's so much bigger than all of that. So there was this swell of consumer course, but now there's also the regulations, particularly in Europe, calling for disclosure of repairability, extended producer responsibility, right to repair. And then there's $53 trillion worth of ESG seeking capital looking for compliant opportunities. So it just feels, my story is one thing, but it just also feels like the forces behind this are just enormous.
And talking about having been frustrated with something that's not working and then seeing it's like, well, there must be a better way of doing that, and then actually putting that into action. Like, talk to me about that.
So when I started this, like I said, I kind of cooked this idea in my head for a long time, but I really loved being at Accenture. That was a fantastic job for me. Consulting is a great environment for people who are curious and like to change their focus now and then and really like a challenge. So I was super happy at Accenture. I did have this idea sort of burning a hole in my pocket. My husband and I had made some angel investments, and we're both business people. My husband's an economist. But I kind of knew that, me coming from this corporate background, I had a little bit of an entrepreneurial experience very early in my career. And my husband coming from the hedge fund world, there was some on the ground knowledge that we didn't have. And I reached a point in my career, particularly with my second child, I was like, I know that, and this isn't a dig against Accenture, it just kind of happens. There is a point where your career is going to, I wouldn't have been fired or anything, but it would have stalled out for a couple of years just because you can't focus on everything at once. So I felt like I was kind of going to be in a bit of a placeholder position for the next couple of years. We had made these investments. I had this idea. I felt like there was some missing knowledge, and I felt like I'll just do this as a bit of a mommy hustle and I'll get some rookie mistakes out of the way. And the way I'd envisioned my post-Accenture career was that, that I will have this hopefully illustrious kind of business career, and I would transform myself into, an angel investor and an investor and an entrepreneur of sorts. So I really kind of started it as a mommy hustle in a way to get some rookie mistakes out of the way. But yeah, I should have known myself better. I mean, I'm a bit of a masochist and I'm competitive and I'm driven. And as soon as I had an idea that I was kind of like I should have known I wasn't going to let go of it. And I was
you can't just do it like halfway.
No,
you have to kind of go all in.
No, I absolutely can't. And I know myself. I mean, I was like that in every step of my career. It's, once I kind of commit myself, I'm really all in, and I'm, as I said, a bit of a masochist about it.
And what has been the biggest challenge for you in the business?
Fundraising has always been tough for us. So all investors will say that they're looking for the next new thing and And what I've learned is that, everyone's got a boss. So it's much easier for someone to fund the 16th SaaS platform if it ticks all the boxes. Even if it fails, it's like, well, it's not, it looked
good on paper.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that. I learned that there is such thing as being a bit too early. And I think that we probably were. At the same time, if we weren't, I don't think we would have discovered the opportunity. And it is a bit of a scale economics business. And being in a lot of senses, being a first mover isn't necessarily an advantage. But in our business, I think it really is, because there's talent, there's operations, there's lots of things that go into it that puts us at an advantage for being. There's a lot of barriers to entry. So being the first mover in our sense was a good thing. So fundraising, being a bit too early. And then lately for me, I've kind of just started to come to grips. I found leadership to be a challenge for a while. So
what do you mean by that?
So I was just going to say, so I find leadership to be a bit of a subjective, kind of elusive concept in general. I mean, what does that really mean? So I came from this corporate career where I led teams, big projects, big programs. I was responsible for, millions of pounds worth of work. And I felt like I was quite good at it. And then when I took what I thought that was from a place like Accenture to a place like the Restory, which is a different business, a different stage, different types of people, like I found that a lot of what I had, it's like it all kind of fell apart.
Right.
And
in what way that you felt that it wasn't relevant, or it wasn't sort of, you couldn't apply it, or the situation was so different and the people were so different? Like, what about it?
Yeah, I mean, all of it.
Right.
So when you're the one holding the bag at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. Like I hadn't really internalized that concept until I had the Restory. So, we would talk about that at Accenture, but it's not like the company's going to go under if I left or I got fired, or if I did a okay job or a great job. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't going to make that big of a difference. So there's that. They were totally at Accenture. You are brought in, you are trained, you are institutionalized in the Accenture way. So there's kind of like, there's a cultural aspect to it that everyone behaves pretty much in the same way, and it's very clear what's expected of you and things like that. So getting people to think and behave in certain ways was a lot. I didn't realize like a lot of that was already done for you at Accenture. And then they're just totally different people. So these are Accenture's people who went to school. They didn't always study business, but like, as I said, if they hadn't, they were, I don't want to say educated, but they were their careers were being directed in that way. They chose that path, and then they get into this Accenture machine, and and I don't want to say it's like a hamster wheel, because it's not. It's a great company. It's just any big institution will have this. And here I am at the Restory, and I've got like artists and
it's very hard to all of a sudden recreate the same type of culture and structure, because that has been happening.
There was no culture, there was no structure, there were totally different types of people. The age difference was quite a bit at Accenture sometimes too, but just everything was different. And what we were trying to do was totally different. It just wasn't as, I had underestimated how well baked things were at Accenture. And I didn't realize how, and I heard Cyan talking about this in one of the interviews, like you have to be really careful how you behave, and everything from like the things you say to the energy you bring into the room, and like how you respond to crisis and things like that. So
well, as you said, the buck ends with you.
Yeah.
So you're the one who is setting the scene and setting all of the expectations, the culture, how you operate. That's kind of down to you.
And not just for your not just for your employees, it's for your investors too.
Absolutely.
So I have the same thing that I have with my employees. I have, obviously it's slightly different, but when I have a board meeting, it's the exact same thing. I still need to be, I suppose, leading. I need to be conscious of who I'm being in that room and what I'm putting out into that room and what I'm communicating and how I'm framing what I'm communicating. And so that's all been a really
just thinking about anyone yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, a huge learning curve to be able to deal with that. And this is one of the things about kind of, having this to some extent kind of like a pre-made route, or at least the steps that you have to go through in places like Accenture, consulting firms, or large, very structured places which have had years, decades of figuring out what that path looks like for you. And then all of a sudden going somewhere where, the business doesn't, it's not a proven business yet.
Yeah.
Everything is brand new. The people coming in, kind of not tried and tested, and you're just trying everything for the first time sometimes. And there's a lot of uncertainties that comes with that.
No one had ever done this before, because it didn't exist before. So there's a challenge, like just doing something that's, that's kind of never been done. So, I mean, no one's ever tried to scale a service, nonetheless, an aftercare service, which has an enormous amount of kind of variability and complexity and all of that. So,
would you say that for a startup founder, is that the hardest thing about having to deal with a lot of uncertainty, or what would you say would be the hardest thing?
I kind of forget sometimes, because now I've been at this for a couple of years, but it's almost like with children, like the challenges change at different stages. So, when your kids were infants, you're like, I can't wait till they can walk. It's gonna be life will be so much better when you can walk. And then you get there and you're like, oh my God, I can't wait till they get, I don't know, ride their bike, so you always look forward to the next stage and think life's going to be better when I get that funding, when I get a CFO, when I get something, and it does, but then it's a whole different set of challenges as well.
Problems.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I guess that's life, isn't it? Where you can never really sit on your laurels, because once you've arrived at one point, then all of a sudden, you're seeing above the parapet, or whatever the expression is, and you're saying, oh, okay, so then this was a molehill, now there is a huge mountain.
You're very right. It doesn't, it's life in general. So I think we probably do this in all aspects of life, whether jobs or anything. When I get there, it's going to be better, and
that kind of like that psychological horizon of that things will always be better in the future.
Yeah. And that probably serves us really well in some ways. And
I think as an entrepreneur, you kind of need to have that ability to be excited about the future, because, you're trying to do something that isn't established. It's not here yet. Yeah. So being able to have that vision and see that going forward is, in my view, is essential, because someone has to imagine that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a founder of a shipping business or something, which I imagine would be enormously challenging, international shipping. And he was being interviewed on a Goldman Sachs podcast, I think it was. And he had this great line. He said, you have to be sufficiently pissed off with the status quo because it takes so much.
Mm-hmm.
It just takes so much. And like, you do come to this point where you're like, there are like lots of easier ways to make a living. Like
for sure.
So
that is for sure.
Yeah. So to stick with it, even when it really, really is awful, and there will be those times, and you got to really believe in the,
so what keeps
in the problem that you're trying to solve for, the vision that you have.
So what keeps you going? Like when you're having like your dark moments and you're kind of everyone has that, I suppose.
Yeah.
But like when you're questioning things, like what keeps you motivated to keep going? How do you do it?
This is one thing that's been very consistent throughout the journey. When a client says to us, we call them clients. When a client says to us something like, like I never thought this bag would like ever look like this again, or it feels brand new, or I'm so excited I found you this, like, I've been looking for this for years, or anything like that. If we deliver a good result and a great experience, and they're happy with it, so much so that they're willing to tell us about it, because you can be happy with something and just not say anything, but you got to be really happy to even say something. And to get people to kind of dedicate their time to tell you, to give you that good, that good feedback.
Tell me about it in terms of getting,
I totally appreciate those people who take the time to give us bad feedback as well, because I think that's equally difficult to get out of people. But if we've done a great job and like people, I feel like they would miss us if we weren't there. That's been consistent since day one. That's the one thing that's been super consistent.
So satisfying. And I feel you when you say when someone gives you a good review. It's like getting reviews on a podcast. It's like people really, really have to be motivated to actually say something positive and go out of their way to give you that feedback. But also knowing that you are actually making an impact, and that your idea and your business is solving a problem that you saw in the world, and actually it is 100% being appreciated. Looking back now, what has been one thing that you think, if you had known it then, have saved you a lot of hassle?
So going back to what I was saying before, had I kind of been more honest with myself that there was no way you were going to just do a mommy hustle and chill out for a couple of years. I have never, ever, ever done that. I would have approached this whole thing in a much more structured way. I felt like, it's like a mommy hustle. I'll, spend a couple grand and it was my own money. So who's I accountable to? Had I been more honest with myself, and I don't know if I would have done it at all. So maybe it's a blessing, maybe it's a curse, but I would have approached it in a much more structured way.
I think the message that I hear a lot is, if you know how hard it is to start it in the beginning, or how many hurdles that you would have to go through, you just wouldn't have started it at all. Because once you're aware of all the issues, then you're like, oh, okay, actually there's a lot of
easier ways to make money.
Well, exactly. And the one thing I hear from entrepreneurs is definitely not about the money, because you really are trying to solve a problem, and that's what keeps you going. Because if that's the case, then it's there's a lot of ups and downs.
You are. There is the payoff that you're working toward as well. But
yes, absolutely. And I'm sure.
But day to day, it is the you gotta be pissed off with the status quo, and you got to really want to solve a problem, and you got to be proud of what you're building too. So the Restory had a predecessor company that was, frankly, might have been a much better business on paper than the Restory is today. But I didn't like the brand I had started. I didn't like the way it was positioned. It was a retail-led concept. It probably wouldn't have survived through COVID, and I really underestimated at the time, and I'm glad that I figured it out quick, like how much you have to believe in it, because you have to stand behind this thing, and you have to pull all your employees with you, and you got to make them believe it, and all your investors, and you know, and the you know, the audience that you're trying to speak to. And if you don't believe it, like, there's no way you're going to get them to believe it. So, you know, that business may have had some features that this business doesn't have that would have been more attractive to certain people, but I didn't like it. And so that had to go, you know, let somebody else do that.
Talking about leadership, when you're talking about that, it's such a difficult thing to conceptualize or to label. I mean, what does leadership mean to you?
So I say it's difficult, because there's so many different styles, and lots of them work in different contexts and at different stages and things like that. So generally speaking, you have like Pied Piper, you're leading from the front, people are following you. You have the people who their approach is more like, I'm a coach, I'm listening, I'm kind of in the middle, I'm with them, you know what I mean? Like, I'm working come from within the middle. And then you have the ones who are silently shepherding and moving things from the back, generally speaking. So I don't really know where I am. I don't think that I'm naturally, I mean, people are obviously following me, but I don't view myself as like kind of the front leader, or I don't really view myself as any of those things per se. But what I try to do is I try to create structure and context, and I try to just provide kind of big direction and a few specific goals. And I try to make sure everyone's got the context and has the structural support to the extent that I can provide it. So at times that's been rather difficult, particularly with regard to funding. I think that most things are figure outable, and most people can do more than they think that they can do. So I do push people. I do push people kind of out of their comfort zone. And I think that for some people that works really well, and they've really thanked me for it. For others, it's, you know, you never know when it's too much. But I try to create the environment, and I try to push people, and I give them a lot of leeway. And I think that, you know, as long as I trust that you're smart and you're well-intentioned and you understand the objectives and you have a kind of a structured approach to how you're doing things, and it's mostly working, I'm really happy to empower people. I don't want to micromanage at all. And I try not to fuss about the small things. So there's some analogy somebody gave me one time, like one of these puzzles, like if you had to put like a bunch of rocks into a jar and they were kind of varying sizes, how would you approach it? And it's like, you have to put the big rocks in first, because if you start with the small, you'll never get the big ones in. So I try to focus on the big rocks, and the small rocks are, you know, kind of important to fill things up. But as long as those big ones get in there, those other ones will find space as well. So I try to take that approach with people. And then sometimes I realize sometimes they just need me to get out of the way and just listen. Sometimes they do need a bit more coaching. Sometimes they do need me to kind of be at the front and doing things. So trying to understand where you have to be at any given time, and for who, and in what situations. That's a bit of a challenge, but that's my approach.
And who's been a leader that's inspired you, and what qualities stood out for you from them?
So I have a view of people that nobody's going to encompass everything that no one's a perfect model. So I try to put together a mosaic of people. So I will take bits that I like that people do. So there's some people in my own team, I really like the way they approach things, like, and some of them are quite junior people. I just really like the energy they bring in the room, that, you know, that'll, you know, I'm like, I should be more like that. Like, cause I understand like what they're, so, and then other times it'll be like just these characters like Christine Lagarde, like, you know, like I just watch her and I'm like, she's chic and she's a boss, and like, you know, so I just try to, you know, and I just try to piece together the bits that, if I had to put in a mood board of people, like that's what I try to do in my mind.
So just having this almost like a collage of
Yeah.
qualities that come up in day-to-day life from different people and sort of putting that together.
Yeah.
I do that too, actually, sometimes. Yeah.
So, I mean, I obviously your biggest influence is going to be your mom and probably the other women, potentially
also grandmothers, I've discovered.
Yeah. And I do that as well. And in fact, if I have a superpower, it's that I'm like ridiculous tenacious. And I definitely get that from my mom. But there are other bits, like my mom can't be all things to all people. So I have to fill in the gaps,
Actually, let's talk about you growing up. So you're from the US.
So I'm from the US. My mother had me very young. And obviously, those young marriages don't tend to last. And my father had kind of addiction issues and things like that. So effectively, I was raised by a single mom. We moved around a lot in the beginning. So it was a quite kind of unchaotic first start. But the upside of that was that everybody was really young. So it was really fun in a way as well. And then things stabilized more as we moved back. We had moved out to Arizona and then moved back to New York. And I was raised by grandparents like yourself. Mm-hmm. And eventually my mom got her footing kind of job-wise and got herself educated. And she eventually found somebody to marry. And she's been with him for, 35 years now. Amazing. And he adopted, there were 3 of us, and he adopted all 3 of us. Oh. And then they had 2 more. So I'm
big family.
Yeah. So I'm the oldest of 5. Mm-hmm. I was listening to Whitney's podcast, and I think I was very much like that too. It was a good town that we eventually settled in. It had decent schools. It was safe, but it was Rochester, New York, and I was quite provincial. And my mother's family was originally from Long Island, so we had been going to New York like pretty much my whole life, and in my early days, I grew up on Long Island beaches and things like that. So New York was always this big shiny thing for me. So 3 days after I graduated high school, I left. I went to New York.
Amazing.
And I was there until I came to London.
And how did that come about? How did you move to London?
So I met my then Swedish boyfriend in 2002. And he pursued me for a few months. And then as soon as I started to give in, I had started business school, and he promptly moved to Bermuda, which was to work because this was when there were a lot
to make things easy.
Yeah, there were a lot of hedge funds setting up in Bermuda at the time. It was a bit the cowboy days of hedge funds. So, but that was fine. I was like, great, a weekend boyfriend. Like that's exactly what I needed.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was absolutely perfect. So we did that for a few years. There was a time when I was in Geneva studying, and he was in Bermuda. So we did long distance for about 4 years.
Wow.
And it got to the point where either you
make a decision.
So I had in my mind's eye that I would, I was like, in a year, I'm going to ask him, if he doesn't ask me first, I'm going to ask him to marry me. And if he says no, then we'll have to go our separate ways. And if not, he's going to have to leave Bermuda because there's no way I'm going to Bermuda. But he asked shortly after I had made that resolution to myself. And then he got an opportunity to come here and start a company. And I was a junior banker. I had a lot of fun, but it was really hard work. It was like 18-hour days, 6 days a week. And
what a great story as well. I mean, it's like the move and the excitement of it all. And
exciting. It was a really exciting time to just be getting married and moving country. And I just felt like it was a really exciting time.
And how did you end up in consulting?
So like I said, I had this finance background, and I just kind of showed them how I always had this fantasy about consulting, and I just applied when I got to London.
Was it what you expected it to be when you were there?
Yeah. It was great. It's really, if you're, as I said, if you're somebody, you can really pursue your intellectual interests through the type of work that you seek out. So it's as if Accenture was the airport, and then like inside it was like Accenture's kind of it's like the market. It's kind of like the marketplace, but you have to go find your own teams and your own projects and things like that. So it's sort of entrepreneurial in that sense that you find you're kind of part of a division, but you can go to lots of different industries and you can reinvent yourself over time. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. So, so it was really,
and then
really good.
you go and start your own business thinking, well, it's just going to be something on the side, just see how it goes. I mean, actually looking, obviously, we talked about the differences between the two. And I wonder what your advice would be to anyone who's listening who is in a consulting or in a big company considering starting their business. What should they know about, be aware of? Like, what advice would you give them?
So Alex DePledge, who was the founder of Hassel and now Resi, and her and I worked together at Accenture. And I remember I came back from maternity leave and she had taken a leave of absence to start the predecessor business to Hassel. And I called her up and I was like, how exciting, and, all starry-eyed. And she said, it's way harder. And I remember going, there's no way that's harder than this. Like, no way. And mostly she was right.
What was she wrong about?
You don't have all the political pressure when you're on your own. You have other pressures, but you don't have politics, particularly when it's small.
That's for sure.
So, but at Accenture, the one downside to a big company like that is very, very political.
One thing I love talking about is failure and mistakes. And the challenges that you had to come, because we don't always know what's best. And in my opinion, mistakes are part of everyday life and should be embraced. I mean, what has been the biggest mistake for you, and what happened, and how did you overcome that?
At the Restory or anywhere?
Let's talk about the Restory.
Again, probably not being as structured in the beginning as I should have been. Definitely not looking after myself. And I don't mean it has real consequences for your business. So there was a time where I was so stressed out and I wasn't looking after myself, and the effect that it had on the team, going back to how you react to situations and what you put out there and all of it. I was putting out all the wrong stuff. And I don't know, but I have a feeling that I was pretty close to kind of ruining it all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but thankfully my...
At which point did you realize that was there a specific moment that you thought, actually, I'm not taking care of myself and this is having an impact?
I went to the US on a family vacation while this was kind of going on, and I was getting up at 3:00 in the morning, just in these absolute panic attacks. And I remember my husband had gone through something and I was like, why don't you just go see a doctor? Why are you just suffering through this? And I just thought why am I suffering through this? So I went and I got some help. Yeah. So that was a mistake that I fortunately caught. And then there's just a myriad of mistakes.
Actually, going back on that, because I'm not fascinated, I think that's the wrong word, but I feel like I've burnout or extreme pressure and how you deal with it and how to recognize the signs that you are not your best physically, mentally, and in business. Because my belief is that how well you take care of yourself is then reflected everywhere else in your business. And for sure, there's lots of pressure in the expectations of others, on yourself. But as your husband said, it's why are you suffering through this? But I think that's just a fascinating space. So what changes did you make as a result? When you went to see someone, what changes did you make?
I got medicine. And I think that we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah.
And then I started, which made me sleep better. So I got more sleep. And then I cut down alcohol a lot and then exercising.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I realized that when I actually...
Probably sleep. It depends how much you're drinking, but kind of sleep and exercise are big things.
It's so simple, isn't it? It's these basic things that we kind of take for granted, but then just start to kind of cut back on more and more and more. But actually, that's what makes the biggest impact on our well-being and how well we perform. And just completely... underused and very, very critical things to well-being.
Yeah.
Well, looking back now, what 3 pieces of advice would you give your younger self?
So I like this question because I'm often kind of giving advice to younger people, which, you know, every older person likes to like pass down their wisdom or whatever. And of course, like, you know, they're not going to listen to but a small bit of it. But I always say, understand that people really like to help younger people, and they really value. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience yourself when somebody young comes to you and they, you know, they're all starry-eyed and like, you know, I'll just do anything, you know, and I just, you know, so that everybody wants to help you. So don't be afraid to approach people. Definitely get out there, talk to people. I would say work your tail off and don't be precious about what you're doing. If it's running coffee, go run coffee. Just get in there, get on the boat that you want to be on and do whatever. Sweep the floor, go get coffee.
Get on the boat.
Yeah, go fix the printer, whatever it is. Just don't be precious about that stuff, and don't worry about titles and things like that. Just try and get on your personal rocket ship and take it from there. I would say understand how your company operates, how they make money, what's important, pay attention to the news, like what's going on. And then how does your boss and their boss, how do they fit into that? And then try to focus on the big rocks. How are you going to make their life better? How are you going to make them look better? How you focus on other people, and you'll get lifted up as well. And then I always say to people, I'm like, go, you know, if you don't know what you want to do, like choose, like, are you an academic? Are you an artist? Are you a business person? And if you're I don't know these other areas, but kind of choose your general direction, but don't fuss too much about if you don't know what you want to be. Very few of us have grown up and be like, I've always wanted to be an actor or a doctor or something. There's more people who just have, you know, no clue than, or kind of have a general direction. Like for me, I'm always like, I don't know what I want. I still say, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I know it's not a lawyer. Like, it's just like the one area.
At least
I'm
you
like,
can
no,
tick that off cross that off your list.
The process of elimination. So at least as far as business people, I always say, if you know you're a business person, get into, and that includes like marketing. So it's not to say that there aren't creative elements in there as well, but go to a startup or go to a big company, like a traditional, like a blue chip company, and just stay there for like 2 or 3 years at least, and just learn everything you can and work your butt off. And then if that's not the place you want to stay, switch it around, go do the other thing, because that balance of experience of having the structured corporate environment and the, you know, and the all hands on deck startup environment, I think that balance is really good. And I would also, last thing I would say is like, you branding on your CV does matter. So you don't need every job to be at like, you know, it doesn't have to be like Goldman Sachs and you know what I mean? Like, but you know, if you're at Goldman Sachs for 2 or 3 years, that's enough branding. It
does open doors.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
Yeah.
It's not gonna, you know, once you're there, you got to do the work, but it does help.
Actually, one of the points that you made earlier about being a young person, starry-eyed, asking for advice, I've been thinking about that lately, because I don't see myself as young anymore. Like, I don't see myself as old, but, you know, obviously not as young as I was when for example, I started my business, which was 9 years ago. And I remember just feeling very shy about asking for things. But when I did, it was incredible how many people were open. But likewise, you get to a certain stage in your business where you might be
You're
stuck.
probably viewed like younger than you think you are as well.
Probably. And
you know, every 28-year-old feels like they're getting old, and like, yeah, every 38-year-old is like, oh, that's so cute. Like, yes, I'll help you.
Yeah, no. So kind of being young at the time, I was like, well, you know, you kind of can forgive yourself when you don't know certain things. But what I realized is that even now, I can still do the same things, asking for advice. So actually, it doesn't really matter what age you are.
Yeah.
There's always going to be people older and more experienced than you.
Yeah.
And that idea of asking for help or being strategic about who you go to.
Yeah.
There are people who are so open and want to do that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what the age is.
Yeah. It's a great point.
What seems impossible to you now, but if it were to happen, would change the course of your life and your business?
I thought about this question. I can't think of anything I would consider impossible at this point. I mean, a couple of years ago, getting to the point we are now would have felt like such an impossibility. But I was there, and now I'm here. In the beginning of journeys, you're getting from A to B feels like a massive milestone. But once you got to B, which is the furthest point you could have possibly seen then, to get to C, you're like, okay, well, I can't see it, but I couldn't see that either. So I know it's out there, and then it just doesn't feel impossible. And then, D is beyond that and E is beyond that. So, so I can't really think of anything that's kind of impossible at this point. I mean, our aim is to have a liquidity event at some point, and that will be great. But I don't know exactly how that happens, but I know what scale I need to build the business up to for that sort of thing to start to be attractive to some people. But it just doesn't feel like an impossibility anymore. When we were, when it was me and my co-founder Thais in my house, that even getting to where we are now that just seemed like a million miles away.
And it's so important to take that moment to look back and actually think, well, this is where we started and this is where we are now. Because I think it's all too often we can be so focused on like what's next, that actually not taking kind of not celebrating the wins and just seeing how far you've come can be, we just don't do that enough.
Yeah.
What do you feel most proud of?
I mean, every parent will say, their kids and their family. And I do like that sometimes when I have a conversation like this, I do remember that I was this frustrated little Rochester girl. And now I'm like, I've lived this interesting life. I've seen a lot of things, obviously not everything, but a lot more things than I would have imagined I would have seen as that girl living in London, speaking to people like yourself. And then the Restory, just seeing something that was like not a fully baked vision in your mind, like kind of take shape and form and start to develop and start to almost take on like a little bit of a personality of its own. So, just kind of start to become its own entity and mature and things like that. So
I think sometimes when we're talking about starting a business and you're like, oh, it was just, I'll just sort of do this as a side thing, as a mum kind of, side company. But actually, you don't really know what the future holds. And sometimes the biggest barrier is just starting in the first place. And the easier you can make it, the more you can actually get something off the ground, because you can have the most amazing plans and think about it, but never actually take that step of action, of actually putting it into
action is everything. You have to take the step and the next one and the next one. And it gets easier. It may seem daunting. Either you start out like you're kind of forcing yourself through something that's really daunting and it's taking everything you can to just kind of take that first step. And other times you're kind of naively stumbling into it like I did. And you're like, oh my God, now I've got a tiger by the tail and I got to make sure I don't get bit, So, but you just need to keep moving forward.
Well, on that note,
I have a friend who says like, who is a serial entrepreneur. He's actually one of my investors now. And he says he recently ran into a tough bit, even with all of his experience, he ran into a tough bit. And he said, I told my wife, he's like, he can't sit down. He won't sit down. He only sits down to sleep. He was working standing up. He absolutely would not sit down because he needed that to like just get him through this really rough time. It was around the time that COVID struck. So yeah, action I think is just everything.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can have the best plans, best ideas, but then you have to actually make them a reality, and
they're never going to look like how you put them down on paper.
Exactly. Like whatever the plans are, then when you're actually testing them in real life and all of these other factors that you didn't anticipate, and just like figuring it out and tinkering and you start to bring new
people into it, and they, they bring they bring their thing to it, and it could just
evolves.
Exactly.
Well, I'm so excited about your plans at the Restory and looking forward to, seeing more of you and what you're doing, and obviously entering clothing as well. And I've got my Chanel wallet that's going to be going in for repair very, very soon. And where can we find you? What's the best way to reach out to you? Or
you can book online from anywhere in the world. You can also book online at farfetch.com, and Harrods has our online widget as well. And then you can go into any Harrods, Harvey Nichols, Selfridges, or Browns in the country. And we will be launching our first mono-brand partner, Manolo Blahnik, this month. So that's going to look for that. There's going to be a lot of celebration around that. We're also launching a second mono brand in the fourth quarter, and our first international retailer as well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
No, super exciting, and such a pleasure to meet you. And thank you so much for coming on to the show. And what a pleasure.
And congratulations on all the success you've had with your show.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Anatomy of a Leader. I hope our guest leadership journeys resonate with you and make you feel like you too can take on the world. Please subscribe so you can be alerted when new episodes are released. Comment, like, tell a friend, share on social media. I'll make sure to support you there as well. And let me know what inspired you, the changes that you've made, and how you too succeeded against all odds. You can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn with the handle MariaHVO, or just search for my very long surname. And if you're hiring leaders to take your business to the next level, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Again, that long surname. Thank you again for being here on Anatomy of a Leader. Bye for now.